Well, I'm a bit reluctant to look into the crystal ball, so to speak, but if we look back at what the Houthis have done, we can see patterns starting to emerge. And that when the Houthis have been met with violence, such as the sort that we've seen overnight, they've responded with violence. So again, I'm not predicting, but I think it's highly likely that they will respond in that type of way. It's their raison d'etre. They use force as a means of projecting their image. And they want to be seen, and I stress this, they want to be seen by people in Yemen and across the wider Middle East as standing up for the Palestinians and standing up to the Israelis and the Americans. So to not respond would sort of undermine their own cause, I think.
And can you tell us why the Houthis have, these strong links with both Palestinians but also Hamas?
So it all boils down to this idea of resistance, I think. And that is intimately tied with power politics, is intimately tied with the histories of state formation across the Middle East. But it shouldn't be just reduced to this idea that that the Houthis are or a sectarian group that supports the Hamas, because they subscribe to different schools of Islamic thought. So that's why I'm saying that it's about resistance. And for the Houthis, they're able to cultivate a great deal of support from Yemenis, from people across the Middle East and across the wider world for standing up for the Palestinian cause, especially at a time when, in their eyes and in many others' eyes, the world has forgotten the Palestinian cause. So even though the Houthis are widely responsible for authoritarian rule, for imposing a theocracy, for brutally regulating life across Yemen, they've been able to cultivate this level of support, which is in some cases surprising, but it also reflects the level of popular sentiment and popular feeling towards the Palestinian cause.
Is that the case in the rest of the Gulf, though? Because, given the disruptions that are being seen in the Red Sea, because all those ships do come through from the Suez Canal, and of course we know that the Saudis are major allies of the US.
Yeah, well, this is where it gets really complex, because if you look back across history, recent history at least, you see the Saudis have spent billions of dollars in a military campaign to defeat the Houthis. The Houthis have targeted key strategic sites across Saudi Arabia, including oil refineries. The Saudis responded with force, much like the Houthis responded to those responses with force. So there's been this cyclical cycle of sort of violence that has consumed many of the states in the region. And because of the links that the Houthis have got to Iran, it's also exacerbated many of the fears that people in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, and across the region have got about their true aspirations. One Emirati told me a few years ago that the reason that they were in Yemen in their military presence was to stop Iran getting a foothold on the Arabian Peninsula. So it's not just the dynamics of what's happening in Yemen per se, but it's about the wider reverberations. Now that's changed, of course, with the Saudi stance towards Iran softening, but the US stance towards Iran hasn't softened, as we saw with President Trump's comments last night.
Yes. And with the, I suppose with the campaign, this has clearly captured Donald Trump's attention. He is a transactional leader looking at business, and shipping is one of the things that he has been looking at. So are we perhaps seeing, this campaign against the Houthis entering a new phase?
Well, that's what he said overnight on his social media platform. He said that hell's going to rain down, and he said it in all capitals. So obviously he's very passionate about this. It's strange because he is close to the Saudis, and the Saudis are very pragmatic of late, and they will have no doubt told him that bombing the Houthis out of existence is not a viable option and it doesn't work. So it strikes me as a particularly strange thing for him to do, to suggest that these attacks, and this was reinforced by key figures within his administration, that the attacks were going to continue uninterrupted until this threat is quashed. The Saudis have proved that that's not possible to do after spending billions and billions of dollars. But again, it goes back to Trump relying on this transactional nature of being a president and relying on sort of global flows of capital, goods, logistical flows, and the Red Sea is strategically important. So it's a really complex situation here with a lot of people's reputations, group reputations on the line, I think.
And what do you read into the statements by the Iran Revolutionary Guard, who basically said that they had nothing to do with this whatsoever, and given the long-held links between Iran and the Houthis?
So in part, I think this is dealing with some of the perceptions and fears that many across the Middle East have had towards Iran. It's also been furthered by some of the constructions and the discourse from Houthi figures and from the Iranians themselves, who capitalized on links with the Houthis for their own ends. But the reality is that the Houthis were never just an Iranian quote-unquote proxy. They were never just doing the bidding of Tehran. They were their own independent organization. Sure, they got money. Sure, they got supplies. But that was in part because it was an easy win for Iran to say, look, we're helping another part of this so-called axis of resistance. But the Houthis subscribe to a different form of Shiism to Iran. They're Zaydis, the Iranians are Twelvers, largely speaking. The Houthis are also Arab, and the Iranians are Persian, largely speaking. So there are lots of differences that have manifested in divergence between the two. So I'm not at all surprised that the Iranians are saying they had nothing to do with it as well. The Iranians are on the ropes, financially, politically, economically. It's not a surprise, and I don't necessarily disbelieve them.
And do you believe, finally, that these latest chapter in this conflict may have any impact on efforts to negotiate the second phase of the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel?
Well, I think for the Houthis, they'd say that this is all about putting pressure on those ceasefire talks and negotiations to try and make sure that the deal is enacted, the deal that was agreed upon. So the Houthis stopped their bombing campaign when the ceasefire deal was brokered and when it came into effect. But now they're saying that the Israelis have put, again, unnecessary and unfair, unjust, illegal, all the words that you'd expect them to use, blockades on the Palestinians in Gaza. So they're saying that this gives them the right to stand up and to continue their campaign. Now, of course, that's a matter for lawyers and whoever else to debate at length, I'm sure. But what this does is it highlights the failure to get the deal over the line. And those of us that have been watching closely have been concerned that no real progress has been made to get into this second phase of a ceasefire deal. But what this does is it highlights how important it really is to get the deal, not just for the Palestinians who are suffering in Gaza, not just for the Israelis who are living in fear of what may or may not happen, but for the wider global economy as well. This is a global set of issues now for humanity and global trade.
Okay, Professor Simon Mabon, really good to get your analysis and insights as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you.